It was a Sunday afternoon when the message arrived. A single line on my phone that cut deeper than any knife. Mom, don't come tonight. Tanya thinks it'll be too awkward with her friends here. That was it. No smiley face, no apology, just a dismissal. And the cruel irony? Tonight wasn't just another dinner. It was my birthday. The day I had carried inside me for weeks, hoping, foolishly, that my daughter might remember who I was beyond the role of a utility, beyond the sacrifices I had folded into every corner of her life. Before we continue with the rest of the story, please comment where you're listening to this from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone screen glowing against the dim afternoon light, my reading glasses sliding to the tip of my nose. The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator. A half-finished cake sat on the counter behind me, its icing carefully piped into pink roses, each one a small attempt at beauty, at celebration. I had made it for them, for my daughter, her husband, my grandchildren, imagining we would gather, light candles, and laugh. But there would be no laughter tonight, only silence. I thought of all the years that had led me here. My name is Marilyn Rose. I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I was a nurse, a career of quiet service. The night shifts, the aching back, the endless stream of lives I tried to mend, all of it I bore with one thought. My daughter deserves better. And so every spare penny, every hour of overtime, every piece of myself I could give went into her dreams. I remember the night she called me at 23, her voice trembling with both fear and ambition. Mama, Preston and I found the perfect house. But the bank says we need a cosigner. Without hesitation, I signed. I put my entire financial future, the roof over my head, my security in old age, all of it on the line for her happiness, for her life. And not just that, for 3 years, I secretly covered a portion of their mortgage, sending quiet payments from my pension so they could maintain the life they bragged about online. The dinners, the vacations, the parties. They never asked how the bills stayed balanced. They never thanked me. In time, my sacrifice became invisible, expected. Now, here I was, on the day of my own birth, being told not to show up, to stay home, to stay hidden. I looked at the cake again, the roses beginning to sag under their own weight. The kitchen smelled faintly of sugar and vanilla, scents that once meant joy but now felt like mockery. My eyes drifted to the small wrapped gift on the counter, a sweater I had bought for Daniel, my grandson, soft and blue, his favorite color. I had imagined giving it to him tonight, watching his little face light up. Instead, the sweater would stay folded in its paper, unseen, unappreciated, like me. I whispered into the empty room. When did I become a burden? The words hung heavy in the air, unanswered, swallowed by silence. As the clock ticked toward evening, the reality pressed in on me. They were gathering without me. My daughter, my flesh and blood, was choosing her friends, her curated life, over the woman who had given her everything. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I wasn't simply forgotten. Maybe I was being erased. When you spend your life giving, you rarely keep track of the pieces of yourself you've left behind. They slip away quietly, like coins dropped into a fountain, forgotten by the one who tossed them, but still sitting heavy at the bottom. I think about those nights when Tanya was just a girl, barely 6, curled up in the twin bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. The old heater in our little apartment used to rattle, and she'd shiver under thin blankets. I would work double shifts at the hospital, come home with aching feet, and still find the strength to drape my own coat over her, whispering, "Mama's here, baby. You're safe." She never knew that most nights, I ate saltine crackers in the nurse's lounge so she could have milk and fruit in her lunchbox. She never knew I sewed her dresses from fabric remnants because the store-bought ones were too expensive. All she saw was that she had something pretty to wear on picture day. Years later, when she turned 16, she begged for art camp in San Francisco. It cost more than my monthly rent. I remember standing in the break room, staring at the overtime sign-up sheet, my pen trembling. I knew it meant more exhaustion, more nights with my body running on fumes, but I signed. That summer she sketched until her fingers cramped, and when she came home glowing with joy, I told myself it was worth every hour I had spent. With a mask pressed to my face, checking IV drips in the sterile silence of the ward. I thought sacrifice was invisible because it was supposed to be. That's what mothers do, right? We give without expecting recognition. We pour ourselves out until the glass is empty, trusting that our children will fill theirs. But somewhere along the way, Tanya began to see my giving, not as love, but as a baseline, not a gift, just the bare minimum. I think about that often. The way love, when unacknowledged, calcifies into expectation. And yet, even after all the years of being overlooked, I still tried. Even for tonight, even for a birthday that was supposed to be mine, I spent hours in the kitchen. My hands moved slowly, piping roses onto the cake, while my knees ached from standing too long. I set the table with my best china, the faded blue and white plates James and I had bought on our honeymoon to Monterey nearly 40 years ago. The candle holders polished, the napkins folded neat. In my mind, I pictured Tanya arriving with her family, arms full of flowers, or maybe just a smile, settling into the chairs, my grandchildren reaching eagerly for the cake. I imagined laughter filling the room, stories being shared, the kind of warmth that had become so rare between us. But instead, my phone had buzzed. Just one message, just one line that undid everything. I sat there staring at the cake, at the sweater folded neatly in its box. A part of me wanted to wrap it all back up, to pretend none of it had happened, to protect myself from the sting. But another part, the stubborn core that had kept me alive through decades of hardship, whispered, "Number. You don't erase love so easily. Even if they choose not to see it, it remains." I stood, my hands trembling, and placed the sweater gently into a drawer. The cake stayed on the counter, a silent witness to what should have been. For years I told myself that one day Tanya would understand, that she would look back and see me, not as a shadow in her periphery, but as the foundation beneath her feet. But as the sun dipped lower outside my window that night, I realized something colder, sharper. Maybe she didn't want to understand. Maybe she had already decided that my role in her life was over. And that truth, more than the empty chairs or the untouched cake, was what broke me. The phone call came just as the sun slipped behind the rooftops. I almost didn't answer, thinking maybe, just maybe, Tanya had changed her mind. Maybe she was calling to say, "Come, Mama, we saved you a seat." But when I pressed the phone to my ear, it wasn't her voice that greeted me. It was Preston's, flat, cold, practiced. "Marilyn, it's better if you don't come tonight. Tanya's friends, well, she doesn't want a scene." A scene. That's what they thought of me. A potential embarrassment, a disruption. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just a liability. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and tried to steady my voice. "It's my birthday," I whispered. "I thought maybe we could—" But the line clicked dead before I could finish. I sat frozen, staring at the wall as the silence pressed in. The cake on the counter looked foolish now, the pink roses wilting in the kitchen light. I felt like those roses delicate, drooping under a weight no one else seemed to notice. Something inside me cracked. I couldn't just sit there. So I picked up my coat, the old wool one with worn cuffs, and I drove. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I followed the familiar streets toward Tanya's house. Their driveway was crowded with cars when I arrived, laughter spilling from the windows. The sound should have been music to me, but instead it pierced, sharp as glass. I parked at the curb and stepped out, clutching the small gift bag with Daniel's sweater inside. My knees ached as I climbed the walkway, but my heart ached more. I rang the bell, and through the frosted glass, I saw figures moving, shadows of a family I thought I belonged to. The door opened, and Tanya stood there, her smile fading the moment she saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. Behind her, a cluster of friends hovered, holding champagne flutes, eyes flicking toward me with curiosity. I wanted to see you, to celebrate. It's my birthday." My words trembled out like broken glass, cutting me as they left my mouth. Her cheeks flushed, not with warmth but with irritation. "We talked about this. You shouldn't have come. You're making this uncomfortable." I glanced past her shoulder and caught Daniel's eyes wide, confused, hopeful. He started to step forward, but Tanya's hand pressed against his chest, stopping him. That gesture, that tiny denial of a grandson's instinct to run into his grandmother's arms, burned hotter than any insult. "Mama, please. Just go. We'll talk another time," Tanya muttered, glancing nervously at her friends. And then, before I could respond, Preston appeared at her side, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. He didn't speak to me directly. Instead, he turned his head toward the dining room and said, "Can someone call security?" The words rang in my ears, louder than the laughter still bubbling from inside. Security. For me. A neighbor, standing in the yard across the street, paused to watch. The door behind Tanya remained open, a stage where my humiliation played out for anyone to see. When the uniformed man finally approached broad shoulders, polite but firm, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. He cleared his throat, eyes avoiding mine, and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." And in that moment, I felt stripped of everything. Not a mother, not even a guest, but an intruder at my own daughter's celebration. I turned slowly, clutching the gift bag so tightly the handles cut into my palms. Each step back down the walkway echoed, a drumbeat of rejection. By the time I reached my car, my vision blurred with tears, the laughter from the house trailing after me like a cruel song. I sat behind the wheel, the sweater still in my lap, and whispered into the darkness, "So this is how it ends." I drove home in silence, the road a blur of streetlights and shadows. My hands shook on the wheel, not from cold but from the kind of grief that gnaws at the bones. At every red light I caught my reflection in the glass a woman hollowed out, mascara smudged into tired lines. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with its usual stillness. No laughter spilling from its windows. No one waiting at the door. Just emptiness. I carried the gift bag inside, set it on the table beside the untouched cake, and stood staring at both. They looked out of place now, like artifacts from another life, a life where I was still wanted. I sank into the chair, the weight of the night pressing into me. For hours, I replayed Tanya's face at the door, the irritation in her eyes, the way Preston had called for security, as though I were nothing more than a stranger. I tried to make sense of it, to stitch together a reason that could excuse such cruelty, but every thread unraveled the same way. I wasn't welcome. The ache in my chest deepened as I thought of Daniel, my sweet grandson, his eyes searching for me before his mother pulled him back. That look wide, uncertain, desperate. lingered in my mind. He hadn't chosen this distance. He hadn't asked for a wall between us, but he was learning it anyway. I poured myself a glass of water, though my throat burned too much to swallow. As I sat there, the clock ticking toward midnight, a realization crept in slowly, sharp as frost on a window pane. I wasn't forgotten. Forgotten would have been easier. Forgotten meant absent-minded neglect, an oversight, something unintentional. But this was deliberate. Tanya hadn't misplaced me in her memory. She had erased me from her life. There's a different kind of pain in being erased. It's not passive, it's active. It's someone looking at all that you are and choosing to cut you out, to scrub your name from the story they want to tell. And that, more than anything, broke me open. I sat in the quiet, tears drying on my cheeks, and whispered to the empty kitchen. So this is who I am now. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just a shadow no one wants to see. But even as the words left my lips, something stirred inside me, faint, but steady. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was self-preservation. Or maybe, after decades of giving and shrinking, it was the first spark of self-respect. Because if they could erase me so easily, perhaps it was time I stopped clinging to a place where I was no longer wanted. The morning after felt heavy, as though the air itself had thickened overnight. I brewed my usual cup of coffee, its bitter scent filling the kitchen, but the warmth did little to soften the chill inside me. The cake still sat on the counter, roses sagging, the frosting now stiff and cracked. I hadn't the heart to throw it away yet. It was as if discarding it would confirm what Tanya had done, that the night had truly been erased. But as I stood there, hands wrapped around the mug, a thought formed, sharper than the pain. If they want me gone, then I will stop offering myself on their doorstep. I walked to the drawer where I kept my papers, bank statements, pension details, the quiet proof of all the sacrifices I had made over the years. I pulled them out, each page, a reminder of how far I had gone to keep Tanya's life afloat. The co-signed mortgage, the hidden payments, the debts I had carried silently so she wouldn't have to. I stared at those papers for a long time. My hands trembled as I gathered them into a folder, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. For the first time, I asked myself, why am I still holding this burden? For someone who sees me as nothing more than an inconvenience. By noon, I made a call to the bank. My voice wavered at first, but steadied as I spoke. Yes, I'd like to discuss removing myself from a co-signed account, I said. The woman on the other end listened kindly, her tone soft but professional. With each step, she explained. With every piece of advice she offered, I felt something uncoil inside me. A thread of control I hadn't realized I'd lost was winding its way back into my hands. When the call ended, I sat in the stillness of my living room and let the decision settle. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't spite, it was survival. A reclaiming of the life I had given away, piece by piece. Later, I took the sweater I had bought for Daniel out of its box. I held it against my chest for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of wool and dye, imagining his small arms wrapped in its softness. Then, with steady hands, I placed it gently into a donation bag. Somewhere, another little boy would wear it. Somewhere, it would still bring warmth. That night, as I lay in bed, I expected to feel hollow. But instead, there was a strange quietness inside me. Not peace yet, not forgiveness, but the absence of begging. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for Tanya's call. I wasn't hoping for an invitation. I wasn't pressing myself against a locked door. I whispered into the darkness, I choose me now. And though my voice cracked, the words lingered like a promise. 2 weeks passed before Tanya called. Her name lit up on my phone screen, and for a long moment, I simply stared at it. In the past, I would have answered on the first ring, heart leaping, ready to smooth over whatever fracture lay between us. But this time, I let it ring until the sound cut off into silence. Minutes later, a text arrived. "Mom," the bank called. "What's going on? Preston said they told him you asked to remove your name. Is that true?" I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight falling across the same chair where I had cried not long ago. My hands didn't tremble this time. I typed slowly, deliberately. "Yes, I can't carry that responsibility anymore." For a long time, there was no reply. When it finally came, her words burned. "Unbelievable. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I read the message twice, then 3 times, waiting for some flicker of recognition, for her to remember the years of overtime, the mortgage payments, the meals I had skipped, so she wouldn't have to. But there was nothing. Only accusation. Only blame. And yet, instead of collapsing under the weight of her words, I felt steady. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was clear. 3 days later, Tanya showed up at my house. She didn't knock softly. She pounded, sharp and insistent, until I opened the door. Her face was tight with anger. "Mom, you can't just abandon us like this. Do you know what this will do to us financially? Do you even care?" Her voice echoed through the hall, bouncing against the walls that had once held her laughter as a child. I looked at her. My daughter, the girl I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had sacrificed every comfort for, the woman who now stood before me with fury instead of gratitude. I drew a breath, steady and slow. "Tanya, I've carried you for 40 years. I've given until there was nothing left. And when I asked for a seat at your table, you turned me away. I won't beg to belong anymore." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. For the first time, it was she who looked unsteady. She who seemed unsure. Finally, she spat out, "Fine. Do whatever you want." And she turned, storming down the steps. I closed the door behind her, my hand firm on the knob. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. Later that evening, as I watered the roses in my garden, I thought about the word she had thrown at me, abandon, and I realized I hadn't abandoned her. I had abandoned the version of myself that lived only to be dismissed. And that, though painful, felt like the first true act of love I had shown myself in years. The days after Tanya's visit felt strangely quiet, but not the kind of silence that crushes. This one was different. It was the sort of stillness that lets you finally hear your own breath, your own heartbeat, without the noise of someone else's demands filling every corner. For the first time in years, I woke without dread. I no longer checked my phone the moment my eyes opened, waiting for Tanya's approval or bracing for her disapproval. Instead, I padded to the kitchen in my slippers, brewed coffee, and sat at the window to watch the sunrise paint the sky in soft gold. One morning, while trimming the roses out front, a neighbor paused on her walk. Her name was Evelyn, a widow, a few years older than me. She admired the blooms, and I offered her a cutting. That small exchange led to a longer conversation on the porch, and before I knew it, we were laughing about the stubbornness of squirrels stealing birdseed. It struck me how rare that laughter felt, unforced, unmeasured, free. I realized I had spent so long rationing my joy, giving every ounce to Tanya, that I'd forgotten how it felt to share light with someone who simply welcomed it. Soon, Evelyn invited me to join her book club at the community center. I hesitated at first, the old voice inside me whispering, "They don't need you. You'll just be in the way." But I went. And when I walked into that circle of women, each with a cup of tea and a story to tell, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. They didn't know me as Tanya's mother or Preston's mother-in-law. They knew me as Marilyn, a woman with her own opinions, her own laughter, her own worth. Week by week, the fog that had clouded my spirit began to lift. I took walks after dinner, letting the cool air clear my mind. I dug into old hobbies, knitting, journaling, even painting clumsy little flowers that made me smile. None of it was perfect, but none of it needed to be. It was mine. There were still nights when grief pricked sharp, when I thought of Daniel's wide eyes at the doorway, when I longed for the feel of his arms around my waist. The ache never disappeared, but instead of letting it hollow me out, I planted it like a seed. I poured it into prayers, into roses, into words scribbled on pages, and slowly, I realized something I'd nearly forgotten. Life wasn't over just because Tanya had shut her door. My story didn't end in her foyer, humiliated and dismissed. It was still unfolding, in sunrises and new friendships, in small joys that belonged solely to me. I had spent decades believing my worth was tethered to being a mother, to being useful, to being needed. But now, with each passing day, I was learning that my worth had always been mine to claim, even in solitude, even in the quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I began to feel whole again. Autumn arrived, scattering gold and crimson leaves across the sidewalks, and with it came a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Seasons were changing, both outside my window and within me. Where once my heart had carried only ache, now it carried something steadier, like the quiet rhythm of waves against the shore. On my birthday the year before, I had stood at Tanya's door, clutching a gift bag and begging for belonging. This year, I spent the morning walking through the park, the air crisp, the sky impossibly blue. Evelyn joined me, her arm linked through mine, and we fed crumbs to the ducks by the pond. Later, the ladies from book club surprised me with a small cake, candles flickering while they sang in shaky harmony. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the family gathering I had once dreamed of. But it was enough. In fact, it was more than enough. Because every smile, every note of that off-key song was genuine. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about the word family. For so long, I had believed it meant blood, obligation, sacrifice. But now I understood something different. Family is wherever love resides. Family can be chosen, can be built anew, even in the later chapters of life. Tanya didn't call that day. Neither did Preston. And though Daniel's absence still tugged at me like a phantom ache, where something once vital had been, I didn't crumble under it. I whispered a prayer for him, hoping he would grow up kind despite the bitterness around him. That was all I could do. Love him silently, from afar, and trust that one day he might seek me out on his own. The pain of being erased never vanished. Some nights it returned in dreams, where I stood again on that doorstep, heart pounding, waiting to be let in. But each morning I woke with the reminder that I had survived it. More than survived, I had begun again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted my garden in honeyed light, Evelyn said something that stayed with me. We were sipping tea among the roses, when she turned to me and smiled softly. "You know, Marilyn, people think starting over belongs only to the young, but I think it belongs to the brave." Her words settled over me like a blessing. Brave. I had never thought of myself that way. I had always framed my life in sacrifice, in endurance. But perhaps bravery was simply this: choosing not to vanish, even when someone else tried to erase you. I realized then that my story wasn't ending in Tanya's rejection. That was merely a chapter. A painful one, yes, but not the final word. The final word was mine to write. As the days shortened and winter drew near, I found warmth in places I hadn't expected. The laughter of new friends, the weight of a good book in my lap, the soft glow of candles, lit only for myself. Small things, perhaps, but each a declaration that I was still here, still worthy of joy. And so, as the year closed, I whispered once more into the quiet, I choose me, not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally remembered to love myself. The words didn't crack this time. They rang clear, steady, and strong. And in that sound, my own voice, unwavering, I knew the truth. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I should have been living all along.